Entertainment industries have always fought, certainly against things that are an outside technological threat to their business. So in the movie industry, when VCRs came out, that was a new technology that was a threat. And they sued, the movie industry sued the Betamax format, and lost in court. But in the end, that turned out to be a good thing for the movie industry because VCRs and video cassettes and Blockbuster video and so forth added this whole new element of the business. And this is especially true in the record business. It has a history going back decades, hundreds of years, of we're going to fight radio when it was introduced. We're going to fight recorded music because we're so reliant on sheet music. We're going to fight the LP when it came in. We're going to fight the CD because that would cause piracy when it replaced the LP. On and on and on and on.
So what we're looking at here is an ill-conceived, racially motivated law that 50 years later has had a very negative domino effect on the music industry. And I think at this point, we really need to address that issue.
History has shown that music has the power either to excite the masses in a productive way or incite the masses in a destructive one. In the Roaring '20s, here in the USA, jazz-inspired ragtime music provided the backbone of the Prohibition era. In the turbulent years of the 1930s and 40s, what would have Nazi Germany been without the marshaled marches of the Hitler Youth and Wagner symphonies? Likewise,
we shall overcome.
The deep spirituals of the civil rights era motivated millions to challenge and subsequently defeat the segregationist Jim Crow laws that for generations were the status quo. But music also has a power to shape public sentiment, which can lead to the creation of laws. This thought brings us to this little building in Memphis, Tennessee, where a visceral brand of music was recorded that did just that. Propelled Washington politicians into forging a law that some have maintained derailed the business dynamic between music makers and music broadcasters that is still impacting the industry today. This is Sun Studios, where Sam Phillips, the founder of Sun Records, hoped to record a white man who could capture the rhythm and feel of a contemporary black artist like Little Richard or Chuck Berry. In this quaint structure, Mr. Phillips recorded rock pioneers like Jerry Lee Lewis, Carl Perkins, Johnny Cash, and the man who would unleash a torrent of both productive and destructive passions onto the world, Elvis Presley.
Well, Sam made the remark one day, he says, I wish I could find a white guy that sounded black. And one day, Elvis walked in the door and recorded a song for his mom, her birthday, I think. And all of a sudden, Sam says, this is the guy.
And they used to say, well, Elvis is swinging his hips like a black person. So, yeah, it didn't bother any kids, did it? I mean, everybody went for it. I had educated liberal parents, and they weren't particularly alarmed. They said, that's interesting kids stuff. But a lot of more conservative people in the North were actually quite concerned about sexual innuendo and corrupting factors. Of course they were. In the 50s, Eisenhower years, put it into perspective.
I love you, Nora. Do you love me?
Oh, I don't know, Jeff.
You're the only girl I've dated in 2 months.
Throughout history, older generations have often rejected the music of their children and grandchildren. But only in rare instances, such as Nazi Germany and Maoist China, did they actually attempt to remove artistic expression from our lives. But in the late 1950s, this happened in the United States, all because of a reactionary group of politicians in Washington, D.C., led by New York Congressman Emanuel Seller, who declared, "Rock and roll has its place amongst the colored people.
But the bad taste that is exemplified by the Elvis Presley hound dog music, with his animal gyrations, which are certainly most distasteful, are violative of all that I know to be in good taste."
In the late 1950s, that is exactly what took place due to Sam Phillips discovering Elvis Presley, a white country boy who dared to express himself like a black man. The U.S. government wrote a law to eliminate rock's vanguard and their new primitive jungle music. How did they do that? By introducing a radical law called
Payola?
Do you know what payola is?
No, I don't.
Payola?
No, I don't.
No, I haven't heard of it.
What?
Payola.
Right there.
I think, no. I'm thinking peyote, and that's probably not the same thing at all.
I know something about the payola scam, but I don't specifically know what it is.
Payola? Isn't that something we find in an Italian restaurant with red sauce? No, actually, I think we all know what payola is. Payola is the payment to a radio station or a DJ for playing certain songs.
Here's how payola works. Imagine that you have a record label guy come visit a radio music programmer with money in one hand and a CD in the other hand. He gives the money and music to the programmer with the understanding that the station agrees to air the song, say for example 10 times a day between the hours of 7 a.m. and midnight for a week. The arrangement only works for the label and broadcaster if the listening audience likes the song. If that happens, listener satisfaction goes up, as does hopefully the audience size and revenue. However, if the music response is negative, then the arrangement fails on all levels. The listener turns the channel, and the result is an unhappy listener base and reduced revenue. In short, why have an unnatural law, namely the Payola law, to discourage radio from playing bad music? American capitalism does the same job and offers an attractive potential benefit: synergy between the two industries.
Let's take a look at the definition of synergy and then analyze why the law prevented it from happening. Synergy is defined as people, groups, or companies working together in a creative, innovative, productive, and mutually beneficial manner.
The music industry and music distributing and broadcast groups could enjoy the benefits of working together in a creative and innovative manner, but they are forbidden by law from doing so. Because there can be no exchange of dollars for services rendered, the music-making side of the business cannot partner with the music broadcasting side. Exchanging dollars for marketing ideas and successful implementation makes economic sense, but the ultimate crime of the Payola law is that it created a hands-off business policy that severely limited both sides' potential to profit from music.
The issue with Payola, I alluded to this before, is a political headline-grabbing thing. Back in the 50s, there was this morality craze. People said rock and roll is evil. Rock and roll is threatening the morals of our children. Not only that, but our white teenagers are listening to black music. And so we have to ban this in some way. Well, you couldn't just ban it. It's free speech, and also it was really popular and selling really well. So what do? You go after the shady, the kind of borderline shady record people and radio people who are doing these $50 handshakes. And it becomes a big cause celeb, and it goes on Capitol Hill. And I think Al Gore's dad, who was a senator at that time, chaired the hearings back in the 50s. And I agree with you. I mean, I think that Payola, I don't really see a major problem with it. But it's something that's very, very difficult in the public eye to sort of stand up for, I mean, you don't really see senators standing up and saying, I'm taking money from lobbyists. Yes, I am, because I'm a proud American. Like, you don't see that. Nor did you see record or radio executives saying, yes, I'm taking Payola. They just sort of hung their heads and they took their lumps and then they stopped doing it. And then they just started it again secretly. And that's how it's always thus.
So we've talked at length about what this law did, and we determined that most people have never heard of it. And the few that have don't understand what it is or why it came to be. One of the things that would help clear the air would be if we renamed it something that was a lot more applicable to the specific time and place the law was sanctioned. Virtually every company uses money to give itself an advantage over its competitors, right? That is not why the law was put into place. In fact, throughout the 40s and the early 50s, radio was offered money, and accepted it too, to play a variety of artists. And the government didn't bat an eye.
The law came into being because certain elements of our government, a very frightened, reactionary, and yes, racist element, didn't like the fact that Mr. Elvis Presley's music had become popular and were convinced that bribery was to blame. So let's rename this decree the Elvis Presley Bribery Law. The impetus behind the law was not that anyone was being paid to air music. This happened frequently and for years. It was Elvis Presley's music that got politicians in Washington in an uproar.
The Presley Bribery Law, as it should now be called, was a misguided knee-jerk reaction that no one had the foresight to revisit, as it turned out to be unenforceable and counterproductive. What we're now proposing is that the government analyze the effectiveness of this damaging ordinance. Is it a productive solution, or does it impede the potential for growth and prosperity?
When we look at the origins of the law and question its necessity in the internet age, we can take the first step in turning the industry from a losing proposition to a winning one. The Payola law was a sentence against the radio industry for the alleged crime of playing Elvis Presley, the most influential artist of the 20th century. It was a draconian law that was passed without a fair trial, no judge, no jury, and most importantly, no valid evidence. In May of 2001, the men's fashion magazine Gentleman's Quarterly, or GQ, featured an advertisement with a napkin mirroring an idea that was gaining momentum throughout the first decade of the 21st century. That was the notion that record labels, as they had existed since the mid-1950s, were becoming obsolete. In short, the internet had turned their once essential services into an anachronism almost overnight. The ad was by none other than Johnny Walker, a Scotch whiskey manufacturer.
The role of the record company in the past was a tremendously different thing than it is now. In the past, it was you were completely and utterly dependent on them for your direction of your sound. Even the songwriting, you couldn't tour without tour support. You couldn't market your band without their relationships with radio and television. Nobody would ever know who you were except for the people who come see you at a bar in your hometown. Because the whole thing was sort of like landlocked by the record industry. And it wasn't necessarily a bad thing, that's just the way things were. There wasn't technology to give you the choice to learn how to do any of this stuff. It was just, that's the way it was.
I think the labels are an extremely outdated mode of getting records produced, especially given that there's such cheap ways to record from home now. You've got fantastic technology in both editing software and recording software, and so it becomes a lot easier to record without having to go into a professional studio. And because the cost of making a record is lower, the cost of distributing a record should also be lower.
With the exponential growth of the internet and the availability of high-quality recording software, it suddenly became possible for musicians to record music at a very affordable rate and to distribute it with the click of a button. This concept of sharing music online, however, was birthed by the growth of a company that was a messiah to most music fans and a pariah to the major labels they threatened: Napster.
Napster changed everything in the record business. Before Napster, everybody in the record business was getting hugely rich selling compact discs. Compact discs cost $15 to $18 a shot, and there were hundreds of millions of them being sold every year, and it was the only way you could buy music. And so, therefore, everybody got rich. The executives got rich. Many of the artists got rich, although not all, because some of them got screwed. But basically, that was the way the music business ran for many, many, many years. But then Napster came along, and it was invented by this young kid who was a freshman in college in New England named Sean Fanning. And he was the guy that sort of created a way for people to take all these files, these compressed audio files that contain songs that were floating around the internet and kind of hard to find. He was the one that created this interface that you could trade them really super easily for free and quickly. And so suddenly he enabled all these people to share music online in a way that had never been done before. And, on one hand, that was an amazing thing for consumers. It created all this power, so you could just sit at home and get all your music quickly and easily for free, as opposed to even just driving to the store and buying a disc, certainly, and paying $18. But on the other side of it, this was all copyrighted music. And so the record industry sort of perceived this as, holy crap, people are going to the Tower Records and breaking all the locks and looting all the CDs from the stores. And so that was sort of the pro and con of it. And Napster changed everything. At the time, the record industry tried to sue Napster, and they succeeded. They won, and Napster ultimately had to go out of business. So you'd think end of story, right? The end, and the record industry kind of goes like this and moves on. But that wasn't the case. Napster just kind of unleashed the dragon. It was file sharing, and piracy suddenly was a reality in the business. It was like a game of whack-a-mole. Like after Napster went away, then suddenly popped up Grokster and LimeWire and Kazaa and BitTorrent and on and on and on. So this thing never went away. But it was really the beginning of the end. This was the downward spiral of the record industry that would continue really to this day. Napster was sued out of existence in roughly the year 2000. And iTunes didn't pop up as a store until 2003. So really you had a period of 3 or 4 years there when there was a demand that Napster created, that the internet created really, for consumers to download music. People wanted to do this. I think a lot of people were sophisticated and they understood that this was piracy and they didn't want to do something illegal. Certainly there were people who just wanted to build illegal music collections. There are a lot of people out there. I've talked to many of them. They're happy to steal stuff. But I think the majority of people want to be honest. They want to consume something. So really, for those kinds of people, what there was a frustration. It was sort of, okay, I want to download a song and I want to listen to it on some portable device, some pre-iPod portable device, And so they couldn't do that. The record industry had these crappy services that didn't really work. They were called Press Play and MusicNet. It was something like $3.95 for a song. It took forever to download, and it just wrecked your device whenever you tried to do it. So that was impossible. So there was this 3 or 4 year period where the record industry was doing all this stuff and kind of going around in circles about trying to create its own service and not really getting anywhere. That's when they lost the market. That was a crucial period when the consumer wanted something and the record industry refused to give it to them. So Napster pointed the direction of that with a neon sign, with a neon pointer, this way to your new business model. And the record industry just didn't go that direction at all. Finally, when Steve Jobs came around, obviously the founder of Apple Computer, in 2002-ish, he started to talk to all these record labels, and he started to say, you guys are not very smart. Like, my consumers, Apple's consumers, they want downloadable music, and you should create a legal service for them to have one. And the industry at that point kind of said, yeah, you've got a point. After 4 years, they kind of went, okay, we sort of see that, Steve, but we just don't know how to do it. And that was the roots of the iTunes Music Store, which would ultimately open in April 2003.
We went and talked to Warner first, and then to Universal, and then each one after the other. And I have to tell you, we met some great people there. And they were willing to do something with us to go change the world. And we were able to negotiate landmark deals with all the big 5 music companies for our music store. And let me tell you what we got. Today, we've got 200,000 tracks. We're loading in tracks every single day. This is going to keep on growing and growing and growing. And all of this music with all of these rights, you can buy for 99 cents per song with no subscription fee.
Steve Jobs came up with the idea for 99 cents a song. He wanted it to be simple. He didn't want to deal with internet and piracy and MP3s and compressed audio and blah, blah, blah. He wanted something that was simple for the consumer. Go onto your computer, click a link, pay 99 cents, get the song you want almost immediately. That was his vision. And it worked. That was something that the iTunes Store, that was the heart of the iTunes Store, is one price fits all. Every single song cost 99 cents. The record labels tried to negotiate with him because they liked variable pricing. They liked some things to be more expensive than 99 cents. But Steve, that was unnegotiable. That was something that he would not give up. And that's why for several years after the store opened, everything was 99 cents.
I'm an economist, so obviously I think price competition is a good thing. And it would seem to me that particularly new artists would like to be able to see their product priced as low as possible so that they get exposure, right? So, it seems to me that to the extent that you can get greater price competition, this probably does benefit consumers. It's not something that firms are going to want to engage in voluntarily because price competition can push your profits down to basically nothing, and firms would like to make as much money as they could. So there's nothing unusual about firms wanting to keep prices high. It's just whether the competitive environment will allow them or not. If, in fact, Steve Jobs meets with record executives from other labels and they agree on a particular price, it seems to me that that violates antitrust laws, that would be collusion.
I have a friend who recently became a naturalized American citizen, and they gave him a packet of cards for him to learn. One of the numbers that they gave him was number 11, and it is, what is the economic system of the United States? If you turn it around, it says it's a capitalistic economy and a market economy. And to elaborate on that, the capitalist economy says the prices of products will be determined by supply and demand and market forces. Market forces being competition between the major players. And the point of this whole dialogue is to say that the music industry does not adhere to any of those principles. It is what we call a forced dictatorship economically.
In July of 2013, a federal judge ruled that Apple conspired with 5 major publishers to raise ebook prices. Apple was fined $450 million. What their ebook division was found guilty of doing, their music division is doing in an even more brazen manner.
Free markets are based on competition, and the results we want from is that competitive process where they are trying to attract consumers by keeping a low price. Price competition is what free markets are all about. And so collusion is bad for the consumer because they are restricting quantity, restricting output in order to jack up price. Precisely the reason why they want to collude is to transfer benefits away from the consumer towards themselves, towards their own profits. And that's why it's bad for the consumer.
In 1926, it costs $5 to make a 5-minute telephone call from St. Louis, Missouri to New York City. That cost would translate to well over $100 today. It is obvious that voice communication is ubiquitous today because the price dropped to the point where basically everyone could afford it. Simply put, the phone companies realized, correctly, that the lower they could drop their prices and still make a profit, the more people that would buy and use phones. As LA Times critic Nodal Cedar pointed out, only greed and stupidity would motivate major labels to raise their prices by up to 4 times that of when physical CDs were king to now, when their own costs have plummeted to next to nothing. The internet has made manufacturing, storage, and distribution costs things of the past. Young mobile music lovers today have been referred to as the playlist generation. They listen to MP3s the way our parents listened to transistor radios, but with 2 notable differences. 1, today we can exercise more control over the music we hear, and 2, we don't have to endure commercials. This is an iPod Shuffle, a little 2-gigabyte music player that will cost the consumer over $250 to load with music from the Apple iTunes Store. That is cost prohibitive. To refresh the music content throughout the course of a year could easily run a consumer over $1,000, where the label's costs are close to nothing. To the rational observer, that is economic suicide. Major labels today should take a page from the telephone companies of the 1920s and pass their savings on to the consumer. By taking this position, their profits will soar instead of sink, and the music industry will boom instead of bust. What the goal of music fans and artists alike should be is to be able to exercise more freedom in the economic marketplace as it completes its move from brick-and-mortar stores to online services like Pandora or iTunes. What we don't have at present is a way for fans to pay for music that adheres to the free market economic guidelines. In addition, the labels have the power because they control the musical copyrights to most of the bands they sign. Here's Casey Ray with the Future Music Coalition.
So what we need to figure out is, A, can we get to a place where everybody who's using music is paying something for it? And B, is there an opportunity to create structures that are easy to understand, that are reasonably transparent, and that compensate musicians directly? I believe that artists should have the opportunity, if they have transferred their copyrights to a label or a publisher, or if you're an author to a publisher, if you've transferred your rights to a third party, you should have the opportunity to have those revert to you after a set period of time. Congress believes that too, which is why you do have in federal law a provision that allows authors, musicians, and songwriters to file a notice with the U.S. Copyright Office about their intent to take back their copyrights after 35 years. So if you are a business that has made its, built empires essentially by aggregating the most copyrights and using that as your leverage in whatever marketplace we're talking about, physical or digital, that's going to be something that concerns you. I believe personally, and I think this is backed up by Congress, that artists deserve to have a second bite at the apple, because when you first sign on the dotted line, you may not have any leverage. You may not be in the most favorable negotiating position. So it is very, very important that artists are able to either hold on to their copyrights and use it or exploit them in a way that makes the most sense for them, or if they do enter into relationships with third parties, that those contracts are fair and that the terms of compensation are on the up and up, and that they have an opportunity within a set period of time to get those rights back.
In order for the music industry to rebound, there must be a risk and reward scenario between the music and broadcasting industries. The first step in reestablishing a working relationship between radio and records is for radio to be proactive in the hit-making process. Here's how that would work. The average cost of marketing a record is both extensive and time-consuming. The way marketing costs could be decimated or radically reduced is if radio, in an LMIV clear channel kind of arrangement, sent music out to the masses and encouraged them to share music research and feedback interactively. Radio would have to invest in the process by hiring top-flight IT pros, design advertising packages, and promote their websites. Therefore, they would need a reward for these expenditures. In a nutshell, this would be the arrangement. If, by building an interactive research platform, radio dramatically lessened labels' costs, they would share a portion of the profits of sales with broadcasting affiliates, say 10 to 15%. That is risk and reward. That is synergy in the making. Putting it simply, this is how music makers and music distributors could enjoy a healthy business relationship, one that would have occurred decades ago had the Payola law not interfered with the evolutionary process of the music industry.
I think at this juncture we need to ask ourselves how a productive, functional music industry would work. And we need to ask another question there. Could the music industry, the people that make the records, sign the bands, market records at a huge fraction of the cost, like 10 records for the price of one? And the answer is yes, they could, but you've got to remove the Payola law. You've got to let the two industries do what they do best. Records have the most success with their records. Whoever makes the best music signs the best bands. And radio has always played a huge role in that, right? They send the music out, they get the information, they establish the relationships, and then they give that information back to the record industry. And I think companies with the largest amount of money in the United States, and in fact Western economy, have always had an advantage in marketing those products to companies that have had a very small amount of money, that have been cash poor. So I think the way to progress into the future is just let the free market economy do its job. And I think you do that by reevaluating the Payola law and whether it's essential in 2014 or even whether it was ever essential.
There's hope in the air, there's music everywhere. We can't afford to fall asleep now. So pick up a guitar, together we'll go far. We better start making sense somehow, because music is everybody's business. Music is everybody's business, and I'm sure there won't be a better time to change things than now. At first it might feel strange to shake your